Hi, everyone. So this is our second broadcast like this, and I'm learning a lot from this. So I hope you are. Really, looking at videos is a whole different experience than practicing Aikido live in real time. It's really quite different. It raises a number of issues that I'm going to try to highlight as we go along. So the first thing we're going to look at is it's just the first little bit from Technical Aikido. Technical Aikido was the video version of Kanai Sensei's unpublished manuscript, which I sent you all the very first snippet from it the other day. And actually, in this bit, the narrator will be reading that as well as another section over it. But it's a video. This first thing is a video of Kanai Sensei doing a demonstration back in Japan. I'd say this must have been around sometime in the early 60s, with a very willing uke. And one thing that's interesting to see when you watch these old ones is just how much Sensei evolved in his movement and his approach as time passed. But this was sort of back in the days. So at this time, he's Uchideshi. He's living with O-sensei at Hambu Dojo. And I think this was not taken at Hambu. This was taken at some other location. I'm not sure exactly where. So with that by introduction, I'll play it. It's only about 4 minutes long, and then we'll break if anybody has any questions about it.
Aikido is, more than anything else, a continuous hard training and disciplining of the body, mind, and senses. At the core of Aikido practice is developing wisdom. In a confrontation, it's essential that you don't behave like a beast, trying only to injure your opponent while protecting yourself. Bugokuro, Budo spirit, is the determination to resolve a confrontation using all of your abilities and wisdom, not just technique. It is critical to realize that Aikido is the expression and embodiment of this Bugokuro. Aikido includes the elements of bugi, or combat techniques, and considers the real possibility of confrontation. Analyzing a survival situation in terms of the relationship with the opponent leads to discovering the most effective fighting techniques. Paradoxically, continuing to develop this approach leads to a harmonious state because the perfection of fighting strategies leads to the realization that no matter how strong you are, you can't fight against all existence. This realization is the way to reach harmony according to the principles of Aikido. In getting to this harmony, an internal process must occur that begins in a confrontational state, but reaches a stage of non-confrontation. Without working through this process, there can be no Budo. We live in the world most often in groups, not alone. The result of this is that comparisons arise. For example, strong versus weak. Each individual tries to develop his particular abilities and compensate for his weaknesses in order to create an advantage over others. For example, by developing speed, strength, or weapon skills. This is the process that eventually led to Budo. In this world, you're bound to have confrontations, and no matter how successful you are in dealing with them, you will eventually realize that there's always someone or something bigger or stronger than you. Ultimately, the most effective defense is not head-on confrontation with an opponent, but to merge with and become part of that opponent. This is how the principle of confrontation evolves into the principle of non-confrontation. At the heart of Aikido is Yamato Gokuro, the idea that martial arts are developed to protect those unable to protect themselves against aggression. Those who follow this philosophy devote themselves to developing Budo to protect peaceful people against cruelty and violence. Aikido includes martial arts, But it goes further. You should understand that Aikido includes philosophies and ideas that go beyond any martial art defined solely as combat technique. True Aikido practice synthesizes Budo with the evolution of confrontation into non-confrontation. Sadly, much of what is called Aikido practice compromises this fundamental essence. What follows is a technical description of the physical principles for true Aikido practice, which provides the foundation for total rather than partial realizations of this art.
So that was Kanai Sensei in 1962, and you know, I think you could see that in that all the techniques were recognizable. They were all pretty much the same way we do them now. And the another thing that I thought was interesting was obviously Kanai Sensei was having a good time. I don't know if you caught it, but he's like laughing half the time especially when something funny, you know, when something funny happened, like when the UK missed the Jo and he hit him with it, or he didn't really hit him, but could have hit him. So it was really appeared to be he was in a very joyful state at that time. But other than that, it should look pretty familiar, but perhaps just an earlier stage of evolution of what we're doing. Anybody have any questions about that?
Sensei, quick question. I noticed especially the beginning of the video, Kanai Sensei did a lot of like bending at the waist into the throws. And I know, you know, we try to kind of keep our posture rather than sort of, you know, kind of bending, you know, at a 90-degree angle into the throw. Do you know what changed in, you know, kind of over time to make that shift?
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. And I think that just at that stage of the game, there was a lot more bending over when we were throwing. I think, and I think Kanai Sensei, as he developed his ideas, he put a lot more emphasis on always maintaining the posture. So I think that was one of the things that did evolve, not only in Kanai Sensei, but I think in a lot of Aikido teachers. I think posture became a more important thing. I think if we have time, I'm gonna show this old demonstration by O Sensei, but that's kind of another interesting benchmark. I think Aikido went through different stages, and I think different things were emphasized more or less at different times. So I think that was one of them. I think that was just a bit of a thing that was more typical in that period. But I think on things like Shihonage, I think you could see it much more. I mean, so there we got Yankyo. That's pretty much the same as we do it. Soto Kaiten Nikyo, Uchi Kaiten Nikyo, and that's, you know, the Nikyo on the wrist. Also, you might notice he's not emphasizing putting one knee down at a time. Now that's a very different movement from the way he did it later. And I'm not sure if that's part of and this Arimi Nage, you know, like, yeah, it was a little bit different. Yeah. And I think people just weren't as sensitive about posture. Not that it wasn't working, but yeah. And as I said, I think I said it last time, the whole concept of being in Toitsutai when you throw is something that evolved over time and became more important as time went on. Aikiotoshi, Kokyunage, That's I guess that's I'm not sure what that it was. It's kind of a Makio Toshi or Osoto Toshi he did in there. Kodagaish, Yurimi Nage. And also at this time, another interesting thing was, now that was a totally different movement from how we would do it later, that Jujinage. That's kind of a Makio Toshi, Koshinage. That's what's that? I forget what that technique is called. It's a Koho Nage or something. Kaiten Nage. All right, Hanmi Handachi, whatever that was. You know, I think one thing that's interesting about this stage also was in the earlier stages, their movement was so free. So maybe that was the trade-off with putting more emphasis on posture. They were very fluid around this time and earlier too. You'll see later.
One thing I was just thinking about too is that he's very young here. I mean, he's almost a kid. He might be in his 20s. And I thought I remember hearing something, and maybe you can correct this. Like, was he Sandan at the point that video was made?
Yeah, I'm not sure what he was at that time. I think he was. I think when he came to the United States, he was 5th Dan, as I recall. It may be that what rank you were in those days wasn't such a big deal. Well, or maybe I know it wasn't a very big deal to O-sensei. Like I think I've told you guys this story, but one time Kanai Sensei is walking around Hanbu Dojo and encounters O-sensei, and O-sensei says to him, "Kanai, what rank are you?" And he goes, "I'm Shodan or I'm Nidan." He says, "Okay, you're Sandan now." So that's how it was. And I always like that story because I think O-sensei was not too attached to what rank people were, or a lot of the normal things that many people think are important. And I think Kanai Sensei was that way too. Oh, the thing I was going to say at Hanbu Dojo at that time was also, you have to remember Koichi Tohei was the chief instructor at that time. And Koichi Tohei had a very distinct movement, kind of movement, and he was really influencing all the Uchideshi very much at that time. Of course, later there was a big split and he left under difficult circumstances. But when you look at old videos, you can kind of see some of the different influences of the different teachers and who was more on the scene or who was more important at various times. Okay, so now I want to go on and I want to go on to the Jo Kata, since this is work. So this is something you guys can do at home. Okay, so I'll try showing this at 75% speed, just so we can see the I can identify the individual techniques for you, and then with the sheet, and this is available. This will be available. You can do this at home. And one thing that I think we're going to do is, if you want to video yourself doing the Jo Kata, you can send it in to me and get a personalized feedback. Or if you're more adventurous, we can show it in public and do a critique of it or a commentary on it in public. But anyway, if you want to do the Jo Kata and send me a video, and it can just be in private, I will give you feedback. So okay, so let's look at this, the Jo Kata at 75% speed, and I'm going to try to call out the numbers of the techniques, and you can, in some cases, the technique names, and others I'll just use the numbers so you can see where they are. So here we go. So that's 1, 2, 1 choku ski, 2 is Harayage. Oh, I'm going to stop here for a second. One of the caveats I mentioned last time is that in the original version, since he's changing direction at various points in the kata, but the points at which he changed and the directions he changed varied. So you can either copy that or you can do it just in one direction if you want to. And that was another issue. Like the Jo Kata changed over time, and so that's another issue. Okay, but anyway, here we are. This is 2 Harayage. 3 is Kyoku Skiage, and Harayage, cover your head, or as they used to call it, right? And now that's 6, 7, 8, the second Yokomen. 9 is Ushiro Ski. Shomanuchi. And now flipping the Jo over, and then Ushiro Ski to the knee is 11, 12. Do is 13. And then flipping it over is 14. And that's part 1. And it's I put a space between that. One other thing is, if you look on the internet, you'll see this is often called the 35 count kata. I'm not sure if I made it 40 or if somebody else did, but the point was to break out some of the techniques that weren't formally named or sort of given distinct parts. And that was just because how you count these things is somewhat arbitrary, and me or someone else or some people, I can't remember who, decided to make more distinctions. So the net effect of the whole thing was it became a 40 or 41 count instead of 35. But if you look on the internet, you'll see it called the 35 count in a lot of places. So it's just another arbitrary thing, how you want to count the things and which parts of the techniques you want to count as separate and which ones you don't. Okay, so that was part 1. Anybody have questions on part 1 or want to see it again? Okay. So now we're going to go on to part 2.
The question.
Oh, yep.
In some of the Yoshiros, like, is it a strike?
Oh, yeah. Good point. Okay, this is another thing that changed. So I'm going to stop it at the Ushiro Ski. There. Okay. So sometimes these Ushiro movements can be either viewed as strikes or kind of transitional movements, I call them. Now, this one is pretty clearly a strike. It looks like it would be a strike in this case, to the face or the throat. Now, the targets of some of these strikes would change also. So in this case, in the case of this first Ushiro Ski, that's pretty clearly a strike. Looking at the target, on the paper, it says face for the target on that one. So that's consistent. So that works. But that strike also could be to the throat, or it could be to the solar plexus. It doesn't have to be just one target. But let's say, in this case, we'll call it the face or throat. Okay, now go on. So then Shomanuchi, flip the Jo over. Now on the paper it says Ushiro Ski, and the way I remember learning it was that was an Ushiro Ski that was clearly a strike, but in the way he just did it, it's just more like a transitional movement, putting the Jo in position for the next movement, which is a strike.
Sensei.
So if you're, as those of you who came to weapons class know, when we practice two sides of this, we turn those Ushiro skis into transitional movements, because if you're practicing with one person, there's nobody behind, so you're not striking anything. But in the way he's demonstrating it this time, that doesn't really look like a ski. It looks more like a transition. But at other times when he did it, I remember pretty clearly it was definitely a strike to the knee. And see, this is another issue that I mentioned before, which is these things would change. And it's not like a nailed down type thing. So it's changing. It can change within itself. It can change over time. There can be like several targets for a strike instead of just one, although maybe we identify one as the basic one that you would identify. So all those things and the counting variations, so there's a lot of variability. The other thing is, I'll tell you guys a secret. When you're teaching, well, you know, sometimes when you're focusing on teaching one point, you start doing something else wrong, because it's hard to keep your concentration, especially if you're trying to make a teaching point. So sometimes you're doing something and you're just not doing it right because you're trying to emphasize some other aspect of it. So don't tell anybody that. But all right, let's go to the end of this. So that's the do, that's 13, hitting the ribs or the trunk. And that's the end of part 1. Okay, now part 2 is about to start. Anybody have anything else on part 1? Okay. Another source of variability is this sheet of technique names, and I'm not exactly sure where that came from. Can't remember, but it was pretty right. But now I'm working on it along with Chris and Mary to make it a little clearer. And there were some sort of errors, but you know, in the case of the do number 13, it said on the sheet originally trunk, but I changed it to trunk/ribs because it's a little more descriptive, and that's the way I understood what it was. Okay, so now we're going into 15, part 2, and that starts with another kyoku ski. So the first 3 movements are like in the first one, similar to the first one, first part, kyoku ski, and then 2 yokomens. So that's 15. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 is the ski over your head. 21's the same thing forward. 22 is flip the jo around. And then this is do, 23. Okay, so now we're repeating this. Then 24, 25, hitting away a strike, 26, turning it over, and then this is like it's called like concealing the jo, like you're keeping the opponent from seeing where the jo is exactly. Okay, now we're into part, I think that now we've started to part 3. I'll make one comment about this over the head ski, you know, which is 20 and 21. So I never really understood what that over the head ski was all about. And I asked Sensei, and he said, this was Sensei's secret technique. So now you know as much as I do about it. But I don't know if it was because Sensei was very small that an over the head a strike would make more sense, or what. But anyway, he said that was Sensei. Okay, now we're into part 3, so I'm just going to go back a little bit. Okay, so that's the end of part 2, and now that's the first ski. Again, part 3, which is 29, again starts with kyoku ski, like the other ones did. Okay, now we're going to have a series of less common skis. Furi ski, Toma ski, and then step forward with the left foot, and then one, oops, something was cut out there. Now we're down to, yeah, something got skipped there.
It was the oi ski
Yeah,
was missing.
yeah. So now we're down to, that's the end. That's hasso. That's the last movement. Let's go back and see what happened here. Now in this section also in part 3, the order of these skis changed. In fact, I had to change it on this sheet because it didn't correspond to this version. So it was obviously taken off another version. But let me just go back a little bit here. Okay, so now we're again at the end of part 2. And that's, now here we go. So 29, 30, 31, 32 is the long one-handed ski. There. Okay, so it is there. And then pull back the Jo, round the back of the neck, big strike, circular strike to the knee, shomanuchi to the left. That's an Ushiro ski. And then this is like a pushing everybody back. And then this is back to hasso, which is a ready position. So that's that. That's all 40. I didn't realize the last part was really not clear. I have other versions which I'll dig up. I somehow didn't catch that last part wasn't that clear, but it was all there. Any questions?
Yes, Sensei, this is Ricky. I thought with the single-handed jab, there was a double step towards the end. Is that wrong?
The last one with the long one-handed ski?
Yes, I thought there was a double
there
step
is.
when you got there.
He did it. He didn't do it at the same time. He took the step with the left and then he stopped there.
Oh, okay.
And then he stepped with the right. That's why it might not have been like the way you would usually see it.
Okay. And in 20 and 21, with the overhand jabs to the back and then to the front, where should the head and the eyes be? When you're lower down and the Jo's above your head and you're jabbing to the back, are you looking towards the back or just executing as if you know where your target is?
I mean, I would say even if your face isn't pointing exactly where the target is, you're looking at it in the corner of your eye.
I understand.
I mean, the way I learned it, you would never completely lose sight of the opponent, if possible. However, you don't necessarily have to be facing him full on with your face. And a lot of things you can do by peripheral vision. So I know the head position, a lot of these things is kind of not directly on to the strike, but I think that's what's going on.
Thank you, Sensei.
Anybody have anything else on the Jo Kata?
Sensei, this is Dave. I did have one question about the footwork. There was one, I missed which movement it was. I wish I had caught the name, but there was something towards the middle on a longer strike where it seems like for most strikes, his feet were both firmly planted. And there's one longer strike where he was up on the ball of his foot with the back foot.
Oh yeah, I think, was that the Toma ski in the third part?
That might have been right. Yeah, I missed the term as it was going through. I'm sorry, but the that for reach or for power?
Yeah, exactly. It's both. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I think it's around here. See if this is the one you mean, like that one. Is that the one you meant?
So he was facing the other way. There's this one, I can't quite catch his feet, but it seems like many of the strikes, the feet are together and they're both planted firmly on the ground. There's one when he's facing this direction where his back foot comes up, he's on the ball of his toe.
Yeah.
Like, here. Yeah, that one.
That one. Okay, yeah. Okay, so that's just a yokomen, right? So yokomen, basically your feet are supposed to be planted and you're supposed to be, using your legs to rotate your hips to put power into that strike. So it's more like that. Now there he's more planted. See, but that's kind of the pushing off the back foot idea. So yeah, you know, it's sometimes everyone is a little different. And, you know, when you're executing a movement, say you're doing a yokomen and you're trying to plant your feet and then rotate your hip and then get the power into the strike, it means it's a combination of different mechanical elements. And you're trying to optimize the amount of each element you're putting into the technique or into the movement. And I think the proportions get off sometimes just because maybe your weight's a little forward, or you're trying to stretch a little further, or maybe you're just doing it wrong. But I think that's normal variability in these things. That's one aspect. Other aspect is that most strikes, you have your feet on the ground and you want your front foot to land a split second before the strike. So at the moment of the strike, your feet are planted, but so you step into it, your front foot lands, and then bang. See, he had a little step back there. It's an artifact. So yeah, and so there's that one. So there's variability. And the other piece is that Aikido's Jo work did not come from Jodo. It came from Sojitsu, spear. It's a spear art that O-sensei practiced. And so some of the skis are where you're very heavy when you hit, and that's the kind of ski that they use to drive a metal tip through armor. Now, other skis, you don't have to be as heavy and planted. Now, Kyoku ski, that's pretty heavy. But this one, yeah, and that one you're pretty heavy, Furi ski. But then when you get here, you're really not planted because you're stretching forward. So now, the way I look at it is, to the extent that you're not really dropping your weight as you strike, you have to hit a more vulnerable point. So maybe instead of the trunk, you would try to hit the throat or the face. Whereas if you're, if you want to drive through the body, maybe that has to be a heavier type of ski. So I think there's a little bit of a trade-off of what target you're trying to hit versus how much power or how much weight you have to put into the strike. Like choku ski or kyoku ski, those are kind of heavy ones. And so as you strike you're sort of like trying to drop your weight into that, and you're bracing your back hand and even the way you're carrying your front hand against your body so you can drive your weight through it. And also you're twisting the Jo. And that's why his right hand is sort of palm up, because you rotated it one way, and then the front hand is rotating the other way. So net effect is you're rotating the Jo as you strike, and that's also something left over from driving spear tips through armor.
Sensei, one note, actually, Mary and I just had a conversation about this, about what kyoku ski means. And it said curved jab, and she was saying that that's like sort of like an older term, that it does mean to kind of curve through, which makes sense, that you're twisting as you do that.
Yeah, so kyoku ski, it's meant to be sort of an irimi. So the opponent strikes you and you take an angle, a curving strike. And actually you'll see it, and I'm just going to play a little bit of these kumijo to show the other side of some of the movements or how they work. But you'll see here actually exactly how, say you envision the opponent hitting straight and then you're coming off on an angle and doing the kyoku ski. So your hip is turning off the center line and the strike comes in on an angle. It's like irimi, where you're evading the opponent's strike and striking more or less the same time. So that's how you don't get hit as you strike. This is just some kumijo, and part of this, since he's doing movement, the parts of the Jo Kata and some not, but so here he's doing sort of the part of the Jo Kata that's kyoku ski, right? And then skiage. So that's and then that's the haraiage, but using the haraiage to strike, to really hit the Jo. So that's the equivalent of 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, and then 6 and 7. So this is he's doing the Jo Kata except leaving off number 1. And this is how you take the kata and you develop the other sides of it, and then you have a kumijo. Now this is not in the kata. This is a different technique. So in this case, he's starting holding the Jo bottom on the ground and just knocking that ski away and then coming back shomanuchi, and then doing a transitional movement like the ushiro ski to the knee. And that's the tate jo, is that what it is? Yeah. But served in a different order, slightly different sequence. Do. Now, I think he's talking about when you hold the front hand, you have to move it so it doesn't get hit. Whoa. But you can also adjust it so your fingers don't go all the way around. So you're kind of cradling it in your palm and fingers. And there's the long one-handed ski. And this big sweep to the knee. So that's in the third part. My understanding is that a lot of the names of things are meant to be evocative as much as descriptive. And so sometimes it's hard to sort out what the actual origin of a word is, or what its meaning is in its use in describing Aikido techniques. Okay. So now I was going to show Kanai Sensei demonstrating 5th kyu techniques. Okay, so let's just, this is 8 minutes, so we'll just go through this quickly and we can see about questions. We could also hold over questions. So that's Larry Rosenstock, who used to be at New England Aikikai. This is Steve Carabino of the UK. He's my senpai. So Shomanuchi Ikkyo. So he's saying, stop the elbow. I'm going to turn up the sound a little bit.
This hand is your system. System. Can push down. You have to but if you start to push down. So rather so rather than stronger system. Then you're right? That's it.
So Shomanuchi Uriminage Urawaza. Any questions quickly on Ikkyo or Riminage?
One thing I noticed there, it was kind of hard because couldn't hear him, but he showed him going around that extra turn, which I know some other schools practice Iriminage that way with an extra turn. And it seemed like he was almost saying by pulling down on the shoulder, that's how you stop them from doing that extra turn that we really shouldn't be. And I don't know if you can
Yeah, I think
comment
that's
on that.
well, I think that's right, but I think it's also just emphasizing that not to put too much power too soon into the throwing arm, but turning them to prepare for the throw by using the arm that you're holding onto their neck or head or pushing on their inside shoulder. So I think easy for people to think that it's all what we call the throwing arm where all the power is. Not necessarily. It's that is the power is there, but it's the other arm is doing something too. One thing that Sensei did say about Iriminage one time was that the first 180 degrees are for real, but after that, it's not for real. So, but again, there's different ways to do Iriminage, right? Okay, let's go on. That's the third way, the perpendicular way. So he's saying also grab tight. That's our equivalent of the perpendicular one. Tenshinage. Okay, so that Shihonage and Tenshinage. Anything on that?
Sensei, I have a question. Like when helping Kohai get ready for this test, do we aim for this?
No, you have to do the way I'm doing it. Well, you know, again, it's like it's a moving target, you know. So you got to figure out what's correct, you know. And if it's too not correct, I'll let you know.
Yes, Sensei.
All right, let's go on.
One more thing come, then what do I do? Always to stop, right? So picking up. Everything, so many very close, right? But okay,
Right, so he's saying stay far. You're taking a distance in Kodagaishi, not like a Riminage or Shihonage.
after three comes, very slow.
So,
Could I ask a question about Kotegaishi?
yeah.
So one thing I noticed, he was saying to do a tenkan, but when he was just sort of going a little bit faster, because he was doing the pin, he didn't do a full tenkan. And this is something I've noticed too. Like sometimes if you do a full tenkan when you're trying to pin, you kind of get too far away from them.
Yeah.
And doing a half tenkan may be more appropriate, maybe because you're not, you know, you're not putting all your power into it. You're trying to control them versus when we project them outward and they're going to go far away, we want to let go, and then you do a full tenkan. Did he ever address the idea of maybe doing a half tenkan for control reasons versus a full tenkan?
No, he never did. This is something that Barbara and I have an ongoing discussion about.
Oh, sorry.
And I think it partially depends on just when the UK falls down too. So I think that's something we should, you know, come back to when we have more time. I don't want to run over too long, but I think we should come back to that because I think that is an interesting issue and bears more analysis. Okay, we're almost done here. But does anybody have any last questions about the test techniques?
I have a different question. Ask Mary or Yuto, what's that mean when he says hello? You
What is
know,
it?
yeah, Sensei says at the end of each technique, he'd say,
Oh,
yeah.
he's saying like something like what is he saying? He's saying something like dozo or something?
Yeah, I thought he said dozo at the end,
Yeah.
which is sort of like, please go ahead, you know,
Okay.
or maybe they can describe it better than me.
Yeah, he would say that thing at the end of every demonstration. You know, sometimes it was more articulated or enunciated, and sometimes less. Anybody else have any general questions or questions about anything? Okay, well, I'm trying to be mindful of the time, so let's finish here. But I just want to say to you guys, you know, I really appreciate everybody hanging in, and as you've realized, I'm sure this is going to be a struggle for the dojo to get through this period, but we're going to do our best to keep everybody learning and interacting during this time and have the dojo still serve its purpose. But main thing is I appreciate all the support that we've gotten from everyone. So thank you very much for that. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you, Sensei.